No, the Japanese response to our efforts to help them has been tremendous. In fact, I felt that living in Tokyo, sometimes walking down the street, a stranger would come up and say, "Thank you," not even knowing who I was, or certainly not knowing I was an American government official. But there was really a genuine sense of warmth and friendship. There were Japanese news. Obviously, I think part of it, there was such horrible news to convey that the Japanese media were also looking for some positive stories, and so their reporters in the United States were reporting about the reaction of Americans, and essentially the stories were, Americans feel empathy toward what we're going through, and this shows the friendly relations we had. I remember once on Japanese television watching a little clip from a news show, and it was about a girl who was about 7 who was selling lemonade and cookies to raise money for earthquake victims. And that resonated with Japanese, that some little 7-year-old American was out there raising a small amount of money, but the point was that she cared and was actually taking action. In fact, one Japanese told me that he said, "This is the worst tragedy we faced since 1945. But this time we have friends." And that, in addition to the material aid, which was important, I think the psychological, knowing that there are people out there who care, who are trying to help us, mattered a lot. Particularly people living in shelters where it's a very stressful situation. You don't have any privacy. You're worried about your food. Knowing that people care and are trying to help you, does matter a lot for people. And we do need to think about that sort of mental health aspect. So generally, very, very positive. Just yesterday, I read a poll that support for the U.S.-Japan Security Alliance was over 80%, which is pretty amazing in any democratic society. To get 80% of people to agree on any issue is I think, pretty tremendous. So I think there is a broad recognition, and certainly people, thanking us for our help and our support. You mentioned the Tomodachi Initiative, and I did, if you don't mind, just one little advertisement for Ambassador Roos felt that we did get a very positive support from Japan for the Tomodachi effort that the U.S. military had made, and he wanted to try and sustain that. So he worked with the U.S.-Japan Council to set up a public-private partnership called the Tomodachi Initiative, and they're doing some fundraising and partnering with other organizations to focus on youth in the area in the Tohoku region to try and do things like providing scholarships, providing sports activities, musical and other kinds of activities for young people in the region. And we're very excited about that partnership. If you're interested, there's a nice website that Tomodachi Initiative has set up. You can take a look. I mean, among the partners we have with Tomodachi Initiative are Major League Baseball, because as you know, there's some Japanese baseball players, and one of the players is from Sendai. So the American Baseball Players Union has contributed $500,000, and Major League Baseball $500,000. And they sent Cal Ripken and some other former players to the Tohoku region to do some baseball clinics for Japanese players. And we, in addition to scholarships, these kind of providing a psychological boost for people is something that's very important. So there's all kinds of very interesting activities going on in the Tomodachi Initiative, and it's one way of trying to sustain the goodwill that came out of this horrible tragedy. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because the website was only one tool. Ambassador Roos had set up, for those of you who don't know, our ambassador in Tokyo comes from Silicon Valley, so he has a lot of friends there, and he met with the CEO of Twitter, came out to Japan, because Japan's a huge market for Twitter, and told the ambassador, "You should start tweeting," and so he did. And I think he had about 6,000 followers on March 10, and by March 20, he had 40,000 followers. And he was when he reached his peak, he was the 9th most retweeted person in the world, right after Lady Gaga, I'm told. So it's not only his followers, but then people who were passing on his message. And so he used this tool as a way of getting information out. And so often, because tweets are so short, he was merely pointing out, go to YouTube and you can see a video on radiation health, or come here and or there's a really good, the Japanese Health Ministry put out some really good information about water safety today, and go here and you can see that, that kind of thing. But people were very, very obviously interested in following that. So that was, one use of social media, obviously Facebook and many other sorts of things. But another thing that was very interesting, I mentioned we had this round-the-clock consular effort, trying to locate and find Americans, and we did send people out to the field, and we were using traditional methods, telephone. We also have contacts in local governments, so we were calling them and trying to get information. But Google sent up a earthquake person finder application, and you could log in and say, I'm so-and-so and I'm here and I'm fine, or I'm looking for so-and-so, and does anyone have any information about them? And actually, our consular people told me that one of the main ways they found people was through this application, where they were going online and looking for people who, in turn, were coming online and not registering, but sort of letting people know, I'm okay, I can't get to a phone, but I'm in this center, and I'll call you, Mom, as soon as I can, kind of a thing. And so it was amazing how these new tools using social media really did help. And actually, it's not just Tokyo, it's many other major cities in Japan as well. And you're correct that one of the differences from this disaster and, say, the Hanshin earthquake that occurred in the mid-90s, that was in a big city, and there was a much higher level of deaths and destruction because it was in a very major city. And while it was obviously a tragedy here, it tended to be more sparsely populated areas that had the most effect, so it wasn't the same impact. I must say, though, in Tokyo, even though it was 230 miles away, we still had a very major earthquake. I think there were 14 people killed in Tokyo, which was mainly interior fixtures from ceilings and so forth falling. It wasn't so much structural buildings collapsing, but there were some deaths and destruction. It was, by the way, very challenging for our employees. I lived a 20-minute walk from work, but we had employees, because the trains all shut down, the subways shut down, there were no buses. One of the very stressful things, I might add, for our employees was the school where many of the American Embassy children go is about a 45-minute bus ride on a normal day in the outskirts of Tokyo. And the last school bus with our kids, which was our elementary school bus, didn't return to the embassy until 1 a.m. Saturday morning. And so for parents, we did have a radio on the bus for emergency purpose, so the parents knew the kids were okay, but it's still incredibly stressful to experience a big earthquake and then be separated from your children for 10 hours. And so you're right. I mean, there's going to be, if a bigger earthquake struck in Tokyo, that kind of experience will be, magnified and replicated. But, what happened, the reason traffic was so bad, just so you know, is the plan in an earthquake is to shut down all the expressways to normal traffic so that they can be used by emergency vehicles, police, ambulances, and so forth. So the expressways, actually, the traffic was flowing very well, but it was only and that's the right thing to do, obviously, is you inconvenience people for people who really need help. So yes, there are plans, and people have stockpiled equipment and food and drinking water. But if you answer, am I confident that everything will go perfectly well? I would say probably not, because in disasters, one thing we've learned is things never go perfectly well, and there's probably no amount of too much planning that can be done. Japan does have a disaster day once a year, which is the anniversary of the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake, where there were hundreds of thousands of people in Tokyo killed. And so the one good thing in a place like Tokyo is in the education system, people are very aware of the possibility of an earthquake. I would say it's maybe a little bit like if you go to Hilo in Hawaii, people are very aware of tsunami risk because of the horrible tsunami that came, I think, in the 1950s to Hilo that was really devastating to the downtown. And so there's a lot of education if you are going to school in Hilo about what to do. If there's a tsunami, you go uphill. And if you go to Hilo, there's actually places where it has the high point of an expected tsunami. And so people know what they need to do. And in Japan, at least, there has been a lot of training. And people know what they need to do, which is, in case you don't, running outside is the worst thing to do in the case of an earthquake. Get under a fixture. I mean, here it would be probably under your chair, frankly. Don't go running out, because that's the worst thing you can do, because things fall off buildings, and so being near a building is not a good thing. So when you ask about planning, it's also training and educating. And I would say my guess is probably a city like Tokyo is better prepared than a big U.S. city is, but is it enough? I would say, of course not. There's always more that needs to be done and that could be done.